got to talk. I got to tell what I feel.
Study the problems of our people for a period of time and then come up with a new analysis and give us some new ideas and some new suggestions as to how to approach a problem that too many other people have been playing around with for too long.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've got a big surprise for you. Yes, you!
Hey everybody, I'd like to thank our special guest for coming on today, the lovely lady and author from Philly, authoring such titles as Your Husband, My Man, Platinum Dust, and Seduction Game, Casey Baylor of UrbanFictionNews.com.
Hello everybody, I'm really excited to be here. Hopefully I'm able to answer, things that you guys want to hear. I'm excited. Just excited to be here.
Well, we're excited too. How about, before we get into things, how about you give our viewers and listeners just a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure. I actually started writing when I was about 8 years old. I always knew I was going to do something that had to do with the publishing industry. And I made a huge leap by, quitting my corporate job. I used to work at the finance department at Wells Fargo, and decided I had enough of that. So I put together Urban Fiction News as a place for writers, authors who were interested in getting their work out, but who didn't really have, especially African Americans, we don't really have that many resources that will kind of direct us on where to go. So I decided to become the directory, to become that resource. I know a lot of times people don't like sharing information, they don't like giving out information. We kind of keep it close to our chest, and I just wanted to reverse that. I feel like, what's for me is for me, and I can share, what I know with you, and it still doesn't hurt me. So I come from that philosophy. So I developed Urban Fiction News as a place to provide resources and information to writers of all genres in the African American community.
That's excellent. I checked out Urban Fiction News, and we want all our listeners and viewers to also go there and check that out. I was looking at some of the titles. Great artwork on a lot of those titles. I never knew. I was surprised when I went there myself just to see how many interesting titles there were out there, something that I never knew about personally.
Right.
DJ Normski, you got any questions?
Yeah, from the educational perspective, I was just wondering that you mentioned that you had gotten into writing early on when you were 8 years old. What would you say to the young African American who's in school right now and considering writing, has a love for writing, but then what's being given to him is, well, you need to go into one of these other fields? What would you say to an African American young person that wants to be a writer these days?
I say the best stories you can give to yourself are the stories that you yourself create. I came from a place where there really wasn't that much literature written by African American individuals that was for my age group. I started at 8 years old. My father used to sit me on his lap and give me chapter books. So they were written by D'NewZ and, people I really couldn't relate to at the time. But at the same time, it did develop in me a thirst and a hunger to want to read more. And then I said, well, you know what? I have a really creative imagination. I see the power and the magic that these writers are giving me because they take my mind places. So I became the person who, at a young age, I started creating stories and then sharing those with my friends. So I was kind of like their little library because they could come to me and get stories. I think that's important. If you're going to be a writer, some of the best stories you can create is to create them yourself.
I like that. I like that. That kind of shows of empowerment to hustle to get where you want to be in life. And that's something that I really think is important.
Yeah.
And just some of the things that we've talked about and in the segment here, DJ Normski's brought up that there is a disparage in Black authors and text material as well as the accepted reading lists in school. And just in your opinion, do you think that's because of the amount of or lack thereof validation for Black authors, or is it just our support of them, maybe just like a combination of the two?
I think it is to? Well, the internet has opened up the floodgate, so to speak, where everybody and anybody can become an author. And because of that, there is an access of books being produced, but it still doesn't take away from the writer who, like myself, I view myself as a writer. There are not a lot of writers out here, even though there are a lot of people who are producing, books. And some people I don't consider them writers. I just consider them a person who had a story to tell. And to me, they're different in the sense of, they just may have had one great idea, they wanted to get it down, they produced it, so now they can also be classified as a writer. But technically, they don't have the writer's spirit, is what I like to call it. They're not, I live, breathe, I walk and talk books all day long. I love what I do, so I consider myself a writer. So in saying that, because there's such an over access of information and books being produced by just about anyone, it kind of like you lose a little bit of validity with the African American writer, especially those who are not taking their craft serious and going at least the extra mile to make sure their work is competitive to what is being produced in the traditional or contemporary literary world.
Okay, that's an interesting take on that. So in saying that, what that made me think is like, let's say I had an idea that I wanted to write a book for. Would you suggest me going and contacting someone like yourself to help write that, or to take that on myself if I'm not actually considering myself a writer?
It depends on how serious you want to take it. I've met people on both sides. I've met people who are writers. That's what they love. That's their passion. They would do it for free all day long. But then I've also met, on the other side of that, people who are, they just have a story to tell. So in saying that, depending on how serious you are about getting your message out, how well you'd like to be received and welcomed into whatever genre that it is you're writing about, you can write it yourself. And I always say, the best writers are readers. So if you're a reader and you know how, to structure your book, and you take your craft serious, because no matter what you put your hands on, you should at least respect it enough to put your best foot forward. So you can write it, even if you're just a person who have a story to tell. As long as you're taking it serious enough to respect the craft, respect, the art that you're introducing to the world, you can put it together yourself.
Well, that's a good point, because as my craft is educational writing and instructional design, and I see a total lack of African American presence in that arena. And when my daughter gets her book list from school for the acceptable reading, I called up the company that prepares that, and I said, I don't see a list of African American authors even when I search for it. And they lamented that they don't have a list. They just picked out some books. So I'm wondering, with all the